Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. May I commend you all and your organisers indeed, for such an open type of meeting. It's all too rare at the national level these days to share this kind of information, which is great. A small personal note for those of you listening to Jenny this morning saying that the Daily Mail online doesn't have much political reporting. I hope it's not true, because I learned 2 days ago that my niece's partner is going to be the deputy political editor of the Daily Mail online, so I hope he really has a job. I'm going to talk to you about out of home, and a number of you might be wondering, because we're talking mostly about digital platforms mixing with traditional, what this has to do with out of home. I hope by the end of it you will appreciate that it does. Not that key, obviously. So, the views that I'm representing today are not solely JCDecaux views. The audience measurement for digital out of home is a consortium of media owners. APG is the largest outdoor company in Switzerland. JCDecaux, you know, and now with Samusa. Clear Channel Outdoor, and Exterior Media, which used to be known as CBS Outdoor. It's the European remains of that company. The American now trading as something else. So, why a consortia? Well, it's difficult to measure out-of-home media, and it's very difficult during the recession period to get money together to do the type of study that was necessary to find out who was looking and how they were looking at digital screens in the out-of-home space. But digital has exploded in the out-of-home space. This is a 40-metre long screen in Waterloo in London. Most of the metros around the globe that we operate in are starting to go digital. The streets of London have digital screens, in the Netherlands, in Switzerland. And we're also seeing shopping malls increasingly having very large format digital screens, small format digital screens around about the size of a bus shelter panel. And here at the Silicon Valley of London, which is at Old Street Roundabout, all 4 of these 36 square metre screens are digital. They currently are bought long-term by Google to advertise their products. Here it's YouTube. And a lot of the market in the United Kingdom is now digital. The airports are increasingly digital, with products being removed to create nicer environments. And here, even in ski stations in Switzerland, we have digital panels before you go off onto the slopes. What that means is for digital, and what it means for out-of-home generally, is that it's predicted within a couple of years that globally, nearly a fifth of all out-of-home, in the mainstream out-of-home venues, and I'm talking about metros, railway stations, roadside, and shopping malls, will be digital in nature. So digital isn't in fact now a part of our business, it's becoming the out-of-home business. In the UK this year, 40% of all revenue to mainstream out-of-home will be digital. And in some of the environments, it's well in excess of half. So digital is really important, and it's important from a measurement point of view, not because we don't know that our people are in front of digital screens, not that we don't know who is in front of those digital screens, but because the content is changing in a public space and the medium is consumed passively, the question becomes how many of those digital interactions are actually seen when it's not permanently displayed. So our main problem is working within our existing JIG structures to demonstrate who sees each individual ad. And for us to understand that, it's important to remind ourselves that out-of-home isn't measured based upon a definition of have read for 2 minutes or presence in the room. We, in the majority of countries, adjust our contact with the advertising message by a metric called visibility adjusted contact. In other words, you have to pass the ad, be capable of seeing it, and we have done numerous studies to develop the notion of what the probability is that you will look poster itself, the advertising message itself, when you pass it. And this was done using a cognitive psychology technique, which is implemented through eye tracking. And it's very simple, and I'll just quickly mention that because it's coming to Spain soon. In your GeoMex survey, this doesn't seem to be operating, so we'll do it from here. Eye tracking takes in numerous forms. In its early days, you would put complicated headsets on a person and a long calibration process, and quite often, in fact, you would have to have your head clamped into a vice and look at material. I've done it myself. It's painful and not particularly attractive. But that's moved on enormously to having devices that you can wear in spectacles or in relatively simple headsets. But it all involves looking at visual stimulus and having the movement of your eye tracked to what you're actually fixating upon. These days, the trackers are a simple bar, about the size of a Kinect bar, if you know those in the Xbox world, and increasingly they're going to be shipped integral to laptops. So we'll have eye movement trackers that will be in laptops that are shipped that that normal people have, which will allow us to have online databases where we can interview people and see what they're looking at. These laboratory studies, if you would like to call them that, have also been validated by real-world studies where people have driven around. The one on the left was done by Nottingham University, people driving around in the real world with eye movement equipment strapped to them so we could see what they were looking at, and also people walking around in internal and external environments. So from all of that data, we get a good idea through scan paths and how people are looking at the world based upon academic studies into cognitive behaviour, of where people are looking, what they're looking at, and how they fixate. The image on the left is from the United Kingdom. It shows people moving to a poster, fixating on the cat, I notice. Something with the internet and online there as well. And moving around. When you see the lines moving rapidly from left to right, that's what's known as a saccade. At that time you're not seeing, your brain cannot see because your eye is in motion. And when you see the dots or the points where it stops, that's called a fixation, where your eye stops and fixates for something in the region of, well, there's a lot of debate about this, but around about a couple of hundred milliseconds. So you looking at me now, you looking at this screen now, what you're seeing is built up of about 4 fixations a second, 4 to 5 fixations a second, where your eye hovers still enough that the brain makes an image. And the brain then puts these images all together. And we can use this technology to measure how people are looking at the world. And when we bring posters into this world, we can see what makes it likely you will look at a poster and build up algorithms of probability. The one on the right is in Finland because they like to hide posters in the trees there. So, angle of panel is one of the key criteria. It's not rocket science, this, it's the sort of stuff we know, but we're able to empirically understand what it is. Angle of panel, whether it's head-on or parallel, affects the probability you will look at it. How far the panel is from your line of sight. So if you're driving a car through a city, if the panel is close to the roadside, you're more likely to see it than if it's very far from the road. How big it is. A bigger panel, all other things being equal, is more likely to be looked at than a smaller panel. If it's illuminated, you're more likely to look at it, particularly at night. If the situation is less complex, you're more likely to look at it than if it's in a complex situation. And how fast you're moving, whether you're walking or driving, the speed of your motion does affect how likely you are to see objects in the environment. So I ran through that very quickly. I've not gone into the deep methodological element of visibility adjustment because that would take longer than I've been allotted for the whole of this speech. But all of out-of-home in mainstream measurement in most countries in the world uses visibility adjustment to define a contact with the advertising medium. But the problem arises when that object then moves. It's all very well to have a fixed poster in that frame, and you know the likelihood for a bus shelter in the middle of Castellana, how likely it is that a person passing it will look at it. But if that poster then changes every 5 seconds, you have a problem with defining the possibility of it being seen. And if we were just to simply divide by the number of ads that are on the poster, we would also get false reading, because movement itself attracts attention. So we set out to try and demonstrate that in the digital world, and the audience measurement for out of home, for digital out of home, is meant to be building on those original Joint Industry Committee studies. So it's not our intention as a consortia to provide new numbers for visibility adjustment, is to provide relative numbers, so that in certain countries you can take your base level and introduce a factor for the difference that digital advertising makes. This is European focused for a number of reasons. Digital is more significant in the European market than in some other places. As I said, approaching, certainly next year it will be at least half of all mainstream out of home will be digital. Just to put that in perspective for you, that means 5% of all advertising spent in the UK, display advertising spent, will be digital out of home. The most extensive application of visibility adjustment is within the European market. The US do have visibility adjustment, but they have their own measurement. It's very important to us that we maintain the existing visibility adjustment measures. We're not wanting to have a fracture in work that's gone on over 15 years to develop an understanding of how people look at posters. So we're not reinventing visibility in any market, and in fact GeoMax is in the process of introducing the adjustment that is common elsewhere to make sure that Spain is aligned internationally with the rest of Europe. So we'll be able to build on that in the GeoMax study as well as throughout Europe. And as I said, we're going to provide a relative difference for digital to existing static factors. And that means even if the measurement technique in Germany is similar but slightly different to that in the United Kingdom, or indeed in the States for that matter, it doesn't matter because we're showing the relative difference, and they can start from their base level that they've already measured and show what difference digital makes. So we're looking for a consistent approach with consistent standards for the whole of Europe. To do this, we've determined that the best methodology, or the best way forward, is to create a virtual anywhere city and measure the digital products displayed within this virtual city, a bit like an Xbox game. The advantage of that is we can develop a study that has a large volume of contact possibilities per respondent. So we can collect a lot of data, a lot of usable data from a few respondents. One of the big problems of out-of-home measurement for visibility is that the studies have been millions of pounds spent over 15 years to create a similar understanding of digital in all of those environments that out-of-home is present in one study is quite a large challenge. We can apply it in several different geographies because we can create a virtual city that can be easily modified to be Spanish, or Scandinavian, or German, or English, or Dutch. We can measure a significant number of outdoor formats. As I said, this is important because digital product is now everywhere in out-of-home. It's not limited to a few environments. We can measure the major environments, and critically, we can control for confounding issues. When the US just managed to measure bulletin boards, they're very large billboards, and bus shelters, 2 formats more or less. They had to shoot hundreds of hours of film. They had to then edit that film into a meaningful passage, and then they showed that to people and used eye movement scanners to see who looked at what. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to measure 2 formats, more or less. So to be able to measure all the environments and all the different formats available in Europe that are digital without difficulty, the virtual world allows us. But we also avoid that problem of filming where you're filming and you're coming up to the target poster and suddenly a truck comes through on the inside. Of course, people look at the truck and not the target poster for that instance. That's the real world, that's what happens, but that's not what happens for everybody, and it doesn't help in a research sense. It's called a confounding issue. So by building a virtual world, we can make sure every respondent interacts with the digital poster at exactly the same moment, in exactly the same situation of display. And we are therefore able to make meaningful comparisons between the different types of display. As I said before, all measurements are relative. So to give you an idea of what a world would look like, this isn't the finished product. We're actually going, this was a slightly earlier version, but we have, for example, a typical city centre in the middle of Europe, and we're able to put into that city centre panels that we can choose to have either as static paper, light boxes, digital with no motion, digital with some motion, or fully automated full motion video. And by putting respondents through this, the first respondent might encounter a poster that is static, and then go on to encounter a second poster that is digital, and then the next respondent will encounter the first poster as digital and the second poster as static. To give you an idea of the difference that we're measuring, on the left is a poster that would be a static light box. This is, if you like, your base level. The next poster across is a digital poster showing the same creative. The next poster is a digital poster with some animation. And then finally, the last poster is full motion animation. And the way we've gone about this is to start with the digital full motion advertisement and then cut it back to the just animated, static, and then light box, in order that we've got consistent creativity. And we've done that for a lot of ads so that we can randomize this within the virtual world and make sure we're removing creative effects as far as possible. But that when we're comparing the difference between somebody encountering a parallel poster in a light box that is static, the person that we're comparing it to will encounter the same creativity in full motion, for example. So we've got a number of environments where this will happen. We've got outer city, inner city, large format, small format, parallel, and head-on posters. Putting people in is one of the hardest things to do if you haven't got millions of dollars and are called Ubisoft, but we have quite modern animation of people to give a realistic feel. To be perfectly honest, it's not strictly necessary other than to make the respondent feel that this environment is realistic. This feels like out by the airport in Madrid, actually. So, we've created a number of drives, sequences. They involve driving to a railway station or a metro, or driving to a shopping mall, getting out of the vehicle, walking through the streets. As on Passus, we'll be also measuring buses in motion for the first time ever. Current bus visibility adjustment is based upon buses being still images, but now we'll be able to put an ad on that bus and measure whether people look at it because it's moving. So we have pedestrian elements in the street, but also pedestrian elements in internal environments, for example, railway stations. We're able to vary the creative between the different digital formats. Everything else is consistent, and we're able to see whether you're more likely to look at a digital ad than a static ad when nothing else changes, when all other confounding issues are removed. It takes quite a while to build this world, which is why it's taken quite a long time to get to the point where we're going to be doing measurement. But I can tell you, you're one of the first group of people to see this film because we are ironing out the last smoothing issues, and it goes live with our first panel of respondents next week. The railway station is heavily influenced on Switzerland, I have to say. The roads generally are meant to represent any kind of normal European city. The individuals will be shown this in high definition, on a high definition screen, and they'll be quite able to read the advertising as they would in the real world. And finally, this is a shopping mall that we've had created based upon one in France. And people will be able to be measured going through the mall environment as well as metros, rail, and cities. I should point out that again, we're not looking for absolute realism. We're looking for a relative measure. But it helps if the people feel the environment's real. And it's known through cognitive behaviour that people can accept these environments as being real. If any of you have played Xbox games of open world nature, or have children who play Xbox games from an open world nature where you're either climbing over buildings or running through swamps and killing things, it can become very real to you very quickly. And you accept the environment that you're in as semi-realistic. And all of our technical tests have shown that people do believe this is realistic. They feel it's realistic. It's also reassuring that in our technical tests, we're getting similar levels of contact to the static lightbox product as we did in the original visibility adjustment studies. So the environment is delivering the same results as we've got from earlier real world and static picture imagery. So, just to conclude, it's important that you understand we're working with joint industry committees in each market. Although this is a consortium of media owners, we are funded and supported by FEPE. FEPE is the international European, well, it's global now, but outdoor body that is made up of all the stakeholders in the industry, including advertisers and advertising agencies. Application of our findings will be a local JIC decision. We've taken the decision that this work will never be done unless we get on and do it. So we're paying for it, but we're going to give it with full transparency to each JIC around the world who wants it, for them to decide how they apply it locally. So the local JIC will still have the decision about how it applies this data with the full transparency of how it was collated. It's not going to be imposed on any market, it's just going to be given away for free. It's also worth pointing out that additional findings on engagement and communication will also be collected. Because we know that you cannot possibly ever have as many people look at each ad on a loop of, let's say, 6 ads as if there were 6 posters in the same place. It's important that we demonstrate to our customers the additional communication that is coming from digital advertising. Digital advertising in the public space attracts more attention than static advertising, but it won't be enough to compensate for some of the audience that can't see it because it's not on, an individual ad is not on display. But we do know, and initial technical tests are showing it, that people receive a greater communication from the digital ad, and they spend longer looking at it. And earlier studies have shown the connectivity between looking at something for longer and higher levels of recall, etc. So expect this to be coming to a JIC near you soon. As I said, the full research work starts next week, thank God, having spent some considerable time building this virtual city. Thank you very much.